I wanted to get Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former head of policy at the Treasury, the father of Reaganomics, best-selling author, syndicated columnist, on with us today because we have the news headlines here. CNBC, don't like a weak dollar, might as well get used to it. So they've gone from denying their dollar devaluation to saying how great it is. China is saying they're getting ready to dump 2/3 of their treasuries. That is, they're going to cut how many they buy by 2/3. They say they're looking at that. Gold and silver continue their surge. Here's the Market Watch headline, all up on Infowars.com and PresentPlanet.com. Drudge also has it all up at the top. IMF bombshell, Age of America nears end. So, I take you now to Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, joining us via audio Skype. And I just went over that news, Doctor, but before we go any further, I'd first like you to respond to Geithner last week, the head of the Treasury, formerly your counterpart, in basically the same position you were in, saying if you don't give us a higher debt limit, if you don't give us more taxes, you're going to cause the default when it's the policies of dollar devaluation, monetizing debt, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, as a top economist, that is causing the technical default. That's what S&P said. They said the higher debt, the printing of the money, that's what's causing it. That's what's causing oil prices to go up. But no, Geithner says go into more debt with us, showing that driving us into this iceberg is their goal. Dr. Roberts, you heard me just cover that constellation of news. What can you tell us about it?
Well, I can tell you lots of things about it, Alex. Technically, Geithner is right. Once you're trapped with a huge and growing budget deficit that you have to finance, and there are no takers, and you have to print the money, you have to have a rise in the debt ceiling, or you do default. So technically, he's right, but so are his critics, who are right that you can't print money forever, because by printing the money, you are producing the destruction of the dollar. So it's a situation where both of them are right, and the only way you can do something about it is to cut the federal spending dramatically. And in my opinion, as I've said so many times on your show, they can only do that by stopping the wars and slashing the defense, the so-called defense budget, the military aggression budget, and closing the 700 or more bases that they have all over the world. In other words, the United States cannot afford its goal of world hegemony. And that is now what the IMF has made clear. The IMF says that in 5 years, the Chinese economy will have surpassed the American economy. I've also, on your show for a number of years, been pointing out that that was exactly where we were headed, because when you offshore your jobs in the interest of short-term profits, you are in effect giving up your economy. You are taking what was your gross domestic product and giving it to the country where you offshore the jobs. As Ralph Gomory put it, what we've done is traded jobs for short-term profits. The jobs have moved to China. This capability then to produce erodes in the United States. It grows in China. And this is why we are becoming more and more polarized between a very small, very rich class and growing poverty everywhere else, the erosion of the middle class. Because the people who get the profits are very different from the people who lost the wages when the jobs were moved offshore. So the corporations driven by Wall Street have essentially destroyed the American economy. And that is now no longer a secret. The IMF itself, which surprised me, because the IMF, in my opinion, which may be mistaken, has always been an agent of American policy. And yet here they are telling the truth. Now, I'll say one other thing. I think this puts the Libyan situation in the right perspective, because the United States, realizing finally that it is being surpassed by China, that is the guys in Washington, are now trying to deny the Chinese resources the way the United States and Britain did to Japan in the 1930s, thus creating World War II in the Pacific. So what the Libya thing is about is canceling out China's economic penetration of Africa, canceling out China's massive energy investments in eastern Libya by overthrowing the regime and thereby eliminating China from the Mediterranean. So you can see the same sort of power play that backfired against the Japanese and resulted in Pearl Harbor now being employed against the Chinese in Libya. And it will also be used against the Chinese in Angola and Nigeria, where they also have energy investments. And this also puts Syria in perspective, because the Russians have a massive naval base in Syria that they are in the process of renovating and are going to keep very large warships there, including aircraft carriers. And so it becomes imperative to overthrow the Syrian regime in order to get Russia out of the Mediterranean as well. So I see all of this leading to a massive war.
You see all of this leading towards the first great war of the 21st century?
As Gerald Celente says, right.
Now, going back, and then we'll expand into the geopolitical realm that you just got into. Going back to Geithner, though, my issue of him being deceptive is he expanded saying, basically, keep the policies we've got in place of the spending, of the bureaucracy, raise the taxes, and that would basically fix the problem, when they know full well that's what's caused the problem, and that they do not want the type of cuts to be made that are needed. And so clearly the private shareholders of the Federal Reserve want to vertically consolidate the economy. You look at the General Electrics and others paying almost no tax because they position themselves. This is the classic game like they use in Mexico or in other third world countries where the wealthy use economic deprivation as a political tool to suppress. The system wants a post-industrial world. That's been stated by the UN. That's Goldman Sachs pays all this money to promote the carbon taxes. I mean, they want this system where the crony, non-free market, fascist capitalist, if you can call them that, are waging war against the free market. And, of course, examples of that, Dr. Roberts, are Obama supporters. They get waivers to not have to buy the health care. Or Obama supporters get to be on the Economic Council and not pay taxes. This is really a criminal looting, and my point is they consciously know what they're doing. They've consciously put the derivatives in place, gutted the economy, moved the jobs overseas with companies they control and dominate, position the police state ahead of the social unrest. I mean, you've talked a lot about how they're just madmen and out of control. I see total precision in what they've set up and deployed.
Well, I know you do, Alex, and that's where we don't agree, because they don't have anything to gain by destroying their own economic base. I see it differently. Ever since the Clinton administration, Wall Street has become more and more powerful. I mean, we had a lot of trouble with them in the Reagan administration, but they weren't able to dominate. But now they do. Ever since the Clinton administration, Goldman Sachs has run the Treasury, and they run the Fed and the New York Fed, and they are very short-term in their outlook, and their short-term outlook is this quarter's profits, next quarter's profits, because those things determine the huge bonuses that are making them all richer and richer and richer, and that's their perspective. They have nothing to gain from destroying the economic base. But the consequence of their short-run view, as Gomery says, is to trade jobs for profit at the expense of the economic capability of the economy. So you can say, well, they won't care because they'll all be mega billionaires, and we'll have put the money into some other currency or to gold or into foreign assets or something. But the reason they're doing it is just simply short-term profits, greed. The deregulation that enabled them also began in the Clinton administration.
Glass-Steagall.
That was a very important part of it, yes. But so was the when they blocked the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation from regulating derivatives. You know, that was Greenspan and Larry Summers and I think Rubin. They blocked the regulation of derivatives. They also took off the position limits on speculators.
That's right. Now they can do unlimited naked shorts and manipulate the markets.
And that's right. So all of this doesn't. It's a form of suicide for them as well, because in the end, there's nothing. And certainly, when we see a situation where the IMF says that the age of America is nearing an end, that means the dollar's role as reserve currency is nearing its end, and that means they won't be able to finance the deficit even by monetizing it. So we're running out of time, and as long as war is so important to them for the profits of the military security complex and the neoconservative ideology of American world hegemony,
sure,
as long as you have that driving the wars, they cannot get the budget under control.
All right, Dr. Roberts, I want to speak to that and then get back into the geopolitical that you were mentioning earlier. But I think there's a paradox here only in semantics. Yes, it's greed. Yes, it's avarice. Yes, it's chutzpah, bravada, whatever you want to call it. The point is, the end result is going to be the same. My point is that with megalomania, with Hitler turning east against the Russians, Napoleon doing the same thing, we know that these people get so confident. The only thing that stays the same, in history is the arrogance of elites. And we're seeing that again, but regardless, they believe they have a strategy and a deceptive stratagem to get away with this. And as the Rand Corporation said 2 years ago, it is a wider war along the order of World War II size, is what they called for to get Americans so desperate in a depression, stage terror attacks, whatever's needed, and then launch huge regional wars that then do escalate. And so my point is that Wall Street was green-lighted to do this because there was a larger plan. Kind of like Rothschild in 1815, knowing that Napoleon had lost, getting his runners back across the channel in those Corvettes, and getting back over and saying the British had lost. He buys up the market, then takes over the British Empire. If we look at this as the American government doesn't know what it's doing, I tend to agree with you. But the Wall Street brains in there, they fully know what they're doing.
Well, I don't think they do, because they have no way to pay for these wars, and the deficit is already can't be financed. And we've had a whole range of foreign currencies, including even the Russian ruble, making new highs repeatedly against the dollar for the last 4 months. New highs in gold and silver. You cannot finance all these wars when you already have $1.5 trillion annual deficits that you're already printing money to cover. And so there's no way out of this except failure, collapse.
Well, let's break down then.
There's nothing to buy up.
Sure, I understand. Let's break that down when we come back, Dr. Roberts. As a top economist, how you see this going from bad to worse. As you said, no way out. We'll be right back. No way out. It runs from bad to worst. I feel like we should be, playing some type of funeral pyre procession music for the Republic, for America, maneuvered into this. Dr. Roberts, and if you've got to go, I understand. I'd like to keep you 5 minutes to the next hour, then Wayne Madsen's coming in, so we at least have 2 short segments to break this down. The technicals of what's happened to the dollar, the move towards the exit's accelerating. What will it mean as the dollar begins to die as the world reserve currency? And is there any way out of this? I mean, obviously the policymakers are full steam ahead, but is there any way out?
Well, not given their arrogance and their hubris, as you so aptly describe them. Theoretically, there's a way out. You would have to stop the wars, gut the defense budget, close the bases. And you would also have to change the way you tax corporations. I've explained this before on your show. They would have to tax corporations according to where value is added to their products, so that if they are producing offshore for American markets, they would have an extremely high tax rate. But if they produce at home with the American labor force for American markets, they would have a low tax rate. That would negate the advantage of the low labor cost. Now, what's also going to negate that advantage is when the Chinese finally give up their currency peg to the dollar, because that's really what protects the dollar. It's the currency peg that China does. The day China gives that up and their currency rises dramatically against the dollar, then that will also show the world that the dollar is not the reserve currency, that it's weak and getting weaker. And the day the Chinese decide to put pressure on Washington by threatening to sell their huge dollar holdings, that also will show that there's not really the superpower role anymore, that its creditors have more power than it does because of its very poor economic position. So things can happen, and things could happen, but the hubris will prevail, in my opinion. I think something else could happen shortly. The Federal Reserve could announce that, okay, we'll have no quantitative easing 3. And then, given the idiots in the markets, they would all say, oh, great, they're not going to buy any more bonds, print any more dollars, so the dollar is going to be strong again. And that could cause the gold and silver markets to collapse temporarily, because they obviously have to continue quantitative easing, as there's no other way to finance the deficit, as they're making no cuts in the spending. In fact, the places they identify for cuts, like Medicare, Social Security, this would simply impoverish the population further and further shrink consumer demand and produce yet larger budget deficits that would have to be financed by printing more money. So they're in an impossible situation.
It's the austerity trap, and then if we lose the AAA rating, the debt costs even more and the interest rates go up.
Of course, right. And the AAA rating is a hoax already. So the reason that the government can survive is that it still has the dollar as reserve currency, and it can pay its bills by printing its own money. That's a very difficult thing for most countries in the world to do. They simply can't do that. And so when they destroy the dollar, which is what they're doing, it's happening every week.
Stay there. Do 5 more minutes with us. Describe what happens when they kill the dollar, how you see that death happening. Robert's with us for another 5 minutes. Okay, Mr. Roberts, you were getting into when the dollar dies. Does it die a slow death, or does it die with a bang? I mean, it's already dying slowly, but then like an old horse with its legs broken, at some point, does somebody put a bullet in its head? Because the Chinese are actually in the news today talking about massively decreasing how many treasury bills they buy.
Yes, it's dying slowly, but when the final death comes, it'll probably be very quickly and very severe. And what Americans will experience will be an amazing jump in the measured rate of inflation. And they'll go into Walmart, as I've said before, and they'll think they're in Neiman Marcus. because today so much of the goods that Americans buy are made offshore, and their price is low because of the Chinese pegged to the dollar. And so once that comes unglued, the prices will be very high. In fact, Walmart announced, the CEO announced a week or two ago that because of the dollar's decline so far, Walmart's customers were going to experience serious price rises, that they had held the prices down as much as they could, but that the collapse in the dollar's value was forcing them into price rises, and that they would not be able to avoid these. So that'll start happening more and more and become faster and more furious. So,
by the way, McDonald's came out over the weekend and said inflation's going to make their food go up.
Well, you know, the World Bank released a report recently that wheat prices have more than doubled between June of 2010 and January of this year. Corn prices have gone up more than 70%, and that this is producing massive hunger and starvation elsewhere in the world. And this, of course, is because all of these things are priced in dollars, and the Federal Reserve is destroying the dollar, the budget deficits are destroying the dollar, the offshoring of jobs are destroying the dollar. And so the cost is being delivered to the entire world. There are now tens or millions of people now are starving.
And we knew, I mean, it's common sense that this QE2 would do this. And they said, oh, that's ridiculous. And now it's here. And finally, the mainstream media is admitting, hey, your oil prices are up. Not just because of speculators they always blame, but mainly because of dollar devaluation. How are they going to handle this politically? I guess you answer the question. Start a new war.
Well, I think they'll be forced into a war because Washington won't be able to accept that it's been dethroned by its own folly and stupidity. And when the rest of the world starts pushing back, they'll still think they're tough guys and that we're a superpower. And so I think that we may be faced with a nuclear war and just the end of everything. I mean, this is how it's likely to end, given the fact that the people in Washington are incompetent, crazed, inhumane. They have no redeeming virtues, and they're playing God with the world.
Wow!
And that's what's going on. I mean, the danger of a nuclear war is huge because just as the Japanese,
Doctor, I got to stop you right there. I don't mean to keep you more because I've got another guest coming in, but this is cliffhanger. You start talking about the danger of nuclear war, and you're a very conservative, focused, respected, listed as in the top 10 economists in the world. Will you come back and spend 4 or 5 minutes breaking down the geopolitical front and how this can lead to nuclear war? Can you stay with us?
Okay.
Okay, stay there. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Wayne Madsen will be with you, but when we come back, we'll finish up with this. Stay with us. Riding shotgun with us for the rest of the hour. Here in studio is Wayne Madsen of WayneMadsenReport.com. Here in studio with us today and tomorrow. He'll be popping in. We're doing interviews with him for a upcoming documentary. But we've been talking to Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, and he was going to be gone at the end of the last hour, but he just brought up his prognosis that the hubris and the runaway train that is the American empire, if you study history with Hitler or Mussolini or countless others, they will start wars. And actually, that's what the Rand Corporation and others say is what's needed to get the globalists out of this crisis. They're attempting to get total power out of their power grab, but in the process, they're destroying the dollar that has been the source of their global hegemony. So in just a few minutes, Dr. Robertson will let you go, former head of Policy Department of Treasury, best-selling author, syndicated columnist, coming out with a bold statement like that you believe this will probably lead towards major war and perhaps nuclear war. Break down the technicals of that geopolitical statement.
Well, Alex, it's hard to do in such a short time, but look at it this way. What are the guys in Washington, what have they done? They've destroyed the economy. They've destroyed the currency. They've destroyed people's incomes. In the first decade of the 21st century, they had two massive stock market collapses, from which retirees have never recovered their assets. They destroyed, with a bubble, they bid up real estate prices, and then they've destroyed the real estate market. There's a massive wipeout of people's ability to look after themselves at home. And the government is overcommitted militarily abroad. We've got 6 wars going, either involving our troops or proxies or drones or airstrikes. These are all very expensive. None of them are affordable. And they're trying now to deny China resources. That's what Libya is all about. They're threatening Russia's national security. That's what Syria is all about, the big Russian naval base.
That's what 888 was about when they launched the attack on the Georgian areas.
Exactly. And so here you have a weak, declining country becoming more and more aggressive toward China, a very strong rising country, and toward Russia, which has an unlimited supply of nuclear weapons. So how much will China and Russia tolerate? I mean, at some point, given the hubris and the lack of judgment in Washington, they're going to cross the line, and they're going to push too hard, and there's going to be a response, and it's very easy for things to escalate, particularly when your own rulers are crazed. I mean, there's nobody in Washington that's sane, is there? I mean, what you show every day, the absurd statements, the insane behavior, the lack of concern, not just for American people, but for people anywhere. There's no concern in Washington for people.
In closing, let me ask you that. I mean, they've got the TSA coming out as a domestic police force. They now admit that they've been surveilling everybody without wiretaps, totally illegal. The TSA sticking their hands down people's pants. Just 20 years ago, they wouldn't let troops use DU. Now they use it at shooting ranges, at National Guard bases, destroying the water table. There's no safety standards now. I mean, it is really just a hubris-driven insanity. They delusionally think they have a plan, but across the board, take Bloomberg last year reporting that 11 years ago they signed secret deals, the VA did, to take the death benefits from World War II vets through current vets. I mean, this is criminality so naked. It's almost like when psychopaths in criminology have killed 15, 20 people, and they start getting more reckless, almost like they want to get caught. Your closing comments on that?
Well, what hasn't the government destroyed? They've even destroyed our civil liberties. We now have an executive, that is the president, who's not accountable to law as long as he can be at war. So, and there's no democracy. As an oligarchy. There's 5 or 6 very powerful oligarchic interests that essentially rule. So everything's destroyed. It's not just the economy. And so you're right. You're absolutely right. And sooner or later, the people will be alienated from the government. I don't know how long people... Look, we have a worse situation than Big Brother in George Orwell's book, 1984, than those people living under. We're dominated by propaganda, by lies, by unaccountable government. Elections are pointless. Nothing ever changes. The political system is essentially impotent.
And that has fed their hubris to the point of like a snake eating its tail. They're now even destroying themselves. And in closing, remember that quote of Karl Rove to the New York Times reporter at a cocktail party in front of a Washington Post reporter? And the reporter's going, come on, you know you're lying about WMDs. I mean, this is becoming delusional. And Rove said, you don't get it. We're history's actors now. Of course we're not following reality. You guys are what we call the reality-based community, but we control reality, so we'll change reality day to day, and then you will report on that new reality dutifully. There is the statement that shows that they believe because they have the power, that they have the power to do anything, and it reminds me of Hitler in his bunker directing armies that didn't exist.
You're right, Alex. except we're all going to pay the price for this handful of fools. They're destroying all of us, and people all over the world are being destroyed. So, you know.
When does the dollar die? And we'll let you go. We appreciate your time. When does the dollar die?
It's dying now. It's dying right now. It's been dying for months, for years, actually. But if you look at the number of other currencies that have made new highs against the dollar the last 4 months, look, even the euro is making new highs. And the euro, despite the sovereign debt crisis in Europe and all the countries that are allegedly bankrupt.
So it's like a cancer patient who's been sick for a while, but now the patient's having trouble breathing.
That's about it, yeah.
All right, Dr. Roberts, you've been right all along, and history will know that you told the truth and stood up for what was right. I hope that people in government and the general public listening realize that it's not enough for you and I to be here telling the truth. They've got to get this information out to everybody. I am seeing some positive signs in neocon talk radio. They're now more and more, saying both parties are bad and that, inside interest in Wall Street are greedy and wrecking everything. Because I think a lot of mainline people who thought they were part of the establishment are beginning to realize that their necks are on the chopping block as well. Maybe self-preservation will get some of these yuppies out of their la-la land.
Well, we can hope so.
All right. Sir, your book is How the Economy Was Lost, The War of the Worlds, available at better bookstores and Amazon.com. Dr. Roberts, thanks for the time.
Pleased to be with you, Alex.
Thank you, sir. There he goes. It's like going to visit the doctor, and we have all these top economists and Nobel Prize winners on, and you name it, and they all tell you the same thing. And Obama says everything's great, the economy's wonderful, everything's fine. The Republicans will not tell you it's the Federal Reserve, except for Ron Paul and Rand Paul. They will not tell you it's a debt black hole impossible to get out of, designed to do this to us. And Robert's point is it's so destructive, even though it gave the bankers incredible power, what are they going to spend the money on when everything's like Zimbabwe? If we have a Great Depression like we had in the 20s and 30s, it will be road warrior. And here's the deal. The economic atmosphere, the economic climate we're in is much worse than leading up to 29. Okay, and I'm not trying to scare you.